Welcome back to the Delaware Way. I'm Larry Menti. We continue our conversation now with the mayor of Wilmington, Mike Purzycki. Thank you so much again for being here. We were talking about blight in the neighborhoods, and it would seem that your efforts and the city's efforts to deal with blight in some of the neighborhoods took a hit when you found out that the housing partnership wasn't financially stable.
Yeah, I don't know if it's exactly the same thing, but I would say that we were disappointed in the overall health and management of the housing partnership. We've got good people, all well-intended. I think the problem was there was a very predictable cash shortfall coming down the road, and people didn't warn. They didn't sound the alarm early enough, and so when anticipated funding didn't show up, then subs didn't get paid on time, checks didn't clear. It was an untenable situation from my perspective, and we had to close it down.
So talk about the effect of that. What did the housing partnership do that's now lost?
Well, with the housing partnership, by the way, it still exists. It's just going to be managed in-house. So we're going to have the head of real estate and housing, Bob Weir, be the executive director and president. So he'll essentially run it and take the place.
It was a nonprofit before, right?
That is a nonprofit, yeah.
It still will be? There's not going to be any city funds
Correct.
For this now?
Well, that's the issue. I mean, so what had happened was the housing partnership subsisted on funding from the city and funding from banks and other organizations around town who had CRA interests. And so what had happened simply is that the projects that they entered into got ahead of funding. So they went out and purchased 100 and some odd properties with cash, depleting their funds. They started some projects that got away from them. They didn't have the funds to finish it. Anticipated funding that was supposed to be forthcoming didn't come. They extended themselves on some other projects. Before you know it, they had a cash crunch. Well, the city put up, I guess, about $650,000, maybe a little more, to make sure that subs got paid, that there was nothing that was just too embarrassing about the circumstances. And then we found out it was even worse. And then we found out that they owed about $5 million to various banks. So all of a sudden we found that there was not going to be an easy fix anymore. And so we thought that the time to come was to close it down.
It was interesting because you started off by saying it's not exactly the same thing. I thought their mission was to buy old houses, improve neighborhoods, and get rid of blight, right?
Yeah, that is. So blight, to me, blight is a bigger strategy than just housing. I mean, it's keeping neighborhoods clean. It's tearing down some of the older properties in town that are in fact blighted. The housing partnership did much of that, but we have other organizations do it too. So I think we're going to still be able to deal with it. But if you just said to me, does blight equal the housing partnership? I'd say no. I said there's a much bigger issue. If you take a look at neighborhoods that need support, for example, West Center City, where we've adopted that as our first neighborhood stabilization project, it was to rehabilitate Hicks Anderson. It was to have trash collected twice a week. It was to provide facade improvement for various properties, 40 or 50 houses down there. So an overall facelift of the community, not just the housing. The housing partnership really took on that housing rehabilitation function, which is part of the mission. If
a person that is not friendly to you gets the swing position in city council, are you going to get this legislation passed, this neighborhood?
Yeah, I think it's going to. Here's where it's been held up in committee, which is really another issue. Council has this rule: it's got to be voted out of committee to get before council. I think it would have passed. It would have passed council if it had just gotten a chance to get on the floor. So I really believe it's going to pass in time. It's too important for it not to pass. So we're presenting another iteration of this legislation. I know some of the people who are going to support it were on the fence before, so I think this has a very good chance of passing. And we're going to be able to go out there and really, put these landlords' feet to the fire.
A couple other things to talk about, property tax reassessment I want to talk to you about, and also the census coming up and how important that is when we continue our conversation with the Mayor of Wilmington, Mike Purzycki, when the Delaware Way continues right after this.
5 minutes on the nose.